The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the cold, lifeless hospital corridor as Donald Reynolds paced back and forth. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor, creating a rhythmic sound that did little to drown out the storm raging in his mind. Anxiety twisted in his chest like a knife, each step bringing him closer to the answers he dreaded yet desperately needed. Just yesterday, his world had been normal, blissful even. Sophia, the love of his life, had fainted unexpectedly at home. A simple fainting spell, the doctors had called it, something not to worry about. They had reassured him she was stable, even smiled as they told him there was no reason for concern. And yet, here he was, standing outside her hospital room, the minutes stretching endlessly, his heart racing like a drumbeat of foreboding. Finally, the door creaked open. A doctor emerged, his face pale, his demeanor hesitant. Donald's pulse quickened as he searched the man's expression for reassurance. But what he saw instead froze him in place. The doctor cleared his throat, unable to meet Donald's eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds," he began, his voice low, barely audible over the pounding of Donald's heart. "But she's gone." The words didn't register at first. They hung in the air, weightless, unreal. Donald's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the doctor, disbelief clouding his mind. "No," he said, his voice sharp and defiant. "That's impossible. She was fine yesterday. You said she was stable." His voice grew louder, more desperate with every word. But the doctor simply looked away, a helpless expression on his face. "It was sudden," he explained, almost apologetically. "Her heart stopped during the night. We tried everything, but sometimes these things happen without warning." Donald felt his world crumble. His knees buckled, and he stumbled into the nearby waiting room, collapsing into a chair as the weight of the news bore down on him. His hands covered his face, but they couldn't stop the flood of memories. Sophia's laughter echoed in his mind, her radiant smile, the way she believed in him when no one else did. She wasn't just his partner. She was his anchor, the one person who had seen past his wealth and ambition to the man beneath it all. And now, she was gone. But even as grief threatened to consume him, a strange, persistent doubt began to creep in. Something about this didn't feel right. Sophia had been fine, more than fine, just hours ago. How could she be gone so suddenly? The doctors had been so insistent, almost eager to finalize the paperwork. Why the rush? And then there was Sophia herself. Over the past few weeks, she had been acting different, more reserved, almost secretive. There were those late-night phone calls she'd brushed off as work, the times she'd disappeared for hours with vague explanations. And the fainting spell. Sophia had never had health problems before. So, why now? The questions swirled in Donald's mind, each one gnawing at his already fragile sanity. The pieces didn't fit, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from him. As he sat there, the doubt grew louder, more insistent, until it drowned out even his grief. Sophia's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mystery. And Donald was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Donald sat in the dimly lit study of his sprawling estate, the weight of Sophia's death pressing heavily on his chest. The room, usually a place of clarity and control, now felt suffocating, filled with the echoes of unanswered questions. He stared blankly at the polished mahogany desk in front of him, his mind replaying every detail of the past few days. The hospital's rushed explanation, the hurried paperwork, the way the doctors avoided his gaze. It all gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. He knew grief could cloud judgment, but this felt different. Something wasn't right. As the night deepened, the house fell silent, amplifying the storm in Donald's head. Memories of Sophia kept surfacing. Her laugh, her warmth, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about their future. But alongside the grief came flashes of her recent behavior. The late-night phone calls, her distracted demeanor, the fainting spell she had dismissed as nothing. The pieces didn't add up. He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as frustration built within him. Donald wasn't a man who believed in coincidences. His entire fortune, his entire life, was built on seeing patterns others missed, on questioning what others took at face value. And now he couldn't stop questioning. Why had Sophia's death felt so rushed? Why had they been so eager to bury her? Then, as the clock ticked past midnight, an audacious thought crept into his mind. It was absurd, invasive, even disrespectful, but it was also his only chance to find answers. What if he placed a camera in her coffin? The idea made his stomach churn. It felt like a betrayal, a violation of her memory. But what if he was right? What if there was something more to her death, something no one else could see? Donald stood abruptly, pacing the room as the conflict raged within him. He ran his hands through his hair, weighing the options. On one hand, he was risking his sanity, and perhaps his reputation, on a desperate act that could lead to nothing. On the other, the thought of doing nothing, of letting Sophia's death remain shrouded in mystery, was unbearable. Finally, he made the decision. He picked up his phone and dialed an old contact, a tech specialist who had once helped him with high-security projects for his company. The line clicked, and a familiar voice answered. "Donald Reynolds," the man chuckled. "What kind of industrial espionage are you cooking up now?" Donald's voice was flat, devoid of humor. "This is personal," he said. "I need a micro camera, something discreet, high quality, and capable of streaming live footage." There was a pause on the other end, the tone shifting as the specialist picked up on Donald's seriousness. "This sounds unusual," he said cautiously. "It doesn't matter," Donald replied, his tone firm. "I need it today." The next morning, Donald walked into the funeral home, his face a mask of determination. The director greeted him with polite condolences, but Donald barely acknowledged them. "I want to add something personal to the coffin," he said, his voice steady. "A keepsake for Sophia." The director, accustomed to eccentric requests from wealthy clients, nodded without question. As Donald approached the coffin, his hands trembled. He carefully placed the microcamera within the lining, positioning it so it would remain hidden. Guilt gnawed at him as he secured it, the weight of the act settling over him like a shadow. But as he stepped back, he felt a strange sense of resolve. This wasn't about desecration. It was about truth. If there was even a sliver of a chance that something had been overlooked, he owed it to Sophia to find out. With a deep breath, Donald left the funeral home, the conflict in his heart giving way to a single, unshakable purpose. Whatever the truth was, he would find it. Donald sat in his dimly lit study, eyes glued to the laptop screen displaying the live feed from Sophia's coffin. The image was dark, motionless, and hauntingly quiet. Hours passed as he watched, every second stretching endlessly. Doubt began creeping in. Had he made a mistake? Was this all just grief clouding his judgment? He leaned back, exhaustion tugging at his eyes, but something deep within urged him to stay. Then it happened. A faint noise, soft, almost imperceptible. He froze, leaning closer to the screen, his breath caught in his chest. It came again, a light rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. His pulse quickened. The feed flickered, and for a moment, he thought he was imagining it. But then, unmistakably, a faint outline of movement appeared. Donald's heart raced as he watched, unable to tear his eyes away. A pale hand slowly emerged into view, trembling, weakly pressing against the lid. He gasped as Sophia's face came into frame, her eyes fluttering open, her lips moving soundlessly. She was alive, trapped, and fighting for every breath. Springing into action, Donald grabbed his phone, dialing Mark with shaking hands. "Get the car," he barked, his voice cracking. "We're going to the cemetery now." Speeding through the dark streets, Donald's mind raced. How was this possible? What had gone wrong? All he knew was that he had to save her. Arriving at the cemetery, he was met with locked gates and a stubborn security guard. "You can't be here," the man said gruffly, but Donald's desperation outweighed his patience. "A woman is alive in that grave," he shouted. The guard hesitated, his disbelief evident. When persuasion failed, Donald didn't think twice. Calling Mark again, he demanded bolt cutters and shovels. Minutes later, a small team arrived, cutting through the gates and racing to Sophia's plot. Donald stood trembling as the men dug frantically, dirt flying into the cool night air. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the wooden lid of the coffin came into view. "Stand back!" one of the men shouted as they pried it open. Donald stepped forward, his heart pounding. Inside, Sophia lay pale and motionless, her breaths shallow. "Sophia," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as her eyes fluttered open. Weakly, she murmured his name, and he leaned in, cradling her fragile form. "You're safe now," he choked, his voice breaking. "I've got you." Donald's car screeched to a halt outside the cemetery gates, his headlights illuminating the locked iron bars that separated him from Sophia. His hands trembled as he shouted into the still night, hoping someone would hear him. Moments later, an old security guard emerged, flashlight in hand, his expression annoyed. "You can't be here," the guard said gruffly, waving him off. Donald's voice was raw, desperate. "You don't understand. A woman is alive in that grave. I need to get in now." The guard hesitated, but rules were rules. "I'm sorry, sir, the cemetery is closed." Frustration boiled over as Donald clenched his fists. "If you don't open this gate, I'll make sure you regret it," he said, pulling out his wallet, offering money, begging for action. But the guard refused, shaking his head. Donald grabbed his phone, his voice sharp and commanding as he called Mark. "Get a team here now. Bolt cutters, shovels, everything." Within 20 minutes, his team arrived, breaking the chains and storming into the cemetery. The cold night air bit at Donald's skin as he sprinted toward Sophia's grave, flashlight shaking in his hand. When he reached the freshly covered plot, he froze, staring at the mound of earth. "This is it," he said, pointing. "Start digging." The team worked feverishly, shovels scraping against dirt as Donald paced, his heart pounding. The minutes dragged on like hours until finally, the wooden lid of the coffin was exposed. "Careful," Donald shouted, stepping closer. With a loud creak, the lid was pried open, revealing Sophia's frail, pale body. For a moment, everything was silent. Then her eyelids fluttered, her shallow breath visible in the cool air. "Sophia!" Donald cried, tears streaming down his face as he reached for her. Her eyes met his, filled with confusion and exhaustion. "Donald," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," he said, wrapping his jacket around her trembling frame. "You're safe now. I've got you." As the team helped lift her out, Sophia collapsed against Donald, her body weak but alive. She struggled to speak, her voice broken. "They made me do it," she murmured, tears mixing with his. Donald's heart broke as he held her close, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe. We'll figure this out together." For the first time in days, a flicker of relief passed through him. Sophia was alive, and nothing else mattered. As Sophia lay in the hospital bed, her frail body supported by machines that monitored her every breath, Donald sat by her side, his hand tightly gripping hers. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, relief washed over him. But then he saw it, the fear etched into her expression. "Sophia," Donald said softly, brushing her hair away from her face. "You're safe now. No one can hurt you. She hesitated, tears pooling in her eyes. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice weak. This wasn't an accident. They made me do it. Donald's heart stopped. He leaned closer, his voice trembling. Who? Who made you do what? Sophia's lips quivered as she struggled to explain. They threatened me, Donald. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd hurt you. Or worse. Confusion turned to fury as Donald clenched his fists. Who are they? Tell me everything. With a shaky breath, Sophia began to recount the nightmare. It started months ago. A man approached me, Victor Kane. He said he knew everything about you, about us. He worked for people who wanted control over your assets. He said the only way to get to you was through me. Donald's jaw tightened as Sophia continued, her voice cracking. They made me fake my death to distract you, to make you vulnerable. They even had doctors and lawyers on their payroll to make it look real. I wanted to tell you, but they were always watching. I couldn't risk it. Victor Kane. The name sent a chill through Donald's spine. Victor was one of his top executives, someone he had trusted with sensitive projects and company secrets. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Donald stood, his fists clenched at his sides. His voice was low, steady, and cold. He thought he could use you to break me. He thought wrong. Sophia reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Donald, they're dangerous. Please, be careful. Donald leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'll protect you, he said. I'll make sure he pays for what he's done. I promise. The next morning, Donald called an emergency meeting with his legal team and private investigators. His voice was sharp, his presence commanding. We have a traitor in our company, he began. Victor Kane. I want everything on him. Emails, transactions, meetings. If he so much as sneezed near a contract, I want to know about it. The team sprang into action, uncovering a web of deception. Victor had embezzled funds, forged documents, and orchestrated Sophia's fake death, all in an elaborate plan to seize control of Donald's empire. Armed with evidence, Donald set the trap. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Victor walked into the boardroom, smug and confident, unaware of the storm waiting for him. Donald wasted no time, presenting the damning evidence in front of the entire board. As the proof played out, emails, recordings, financial trails, Victor's facade crumbled. He tried to deny it, to shift blame, but it was useless. By the time the police arrived to take him away, his betrayal was laid bare for all to see. Donald watched as Victor was handcuffed and led out, his resolve hardening. He turned back to his team, his voice calm but firm. We protect what's ours. We protect the people we care about, and we never let this happen again. That evening, he returned to Sophia's side, taking her hand in his. It's over, he said softly. Victor and his people are done. You're safe now. Sophia smiled weakly, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me, for saving me. Donald shook his head, his voice filled with emotion. You saved me too, and I'm never letting you go again. The tension in the executive boardroom was palpable as Donald Reynolds entered, his presence commanding and his expression icy. The room fell silent as he took his seat at the head of the long table, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Across from him sat Victor Kane, his usual smug confidence etched into every line of his face. Donald leaned forward, his voice calm but laced with steel. Gentlemen, I've called this meeting to address a serious issue: betrayal from within. The room stirred with murmurs of confusion and unease. Victor raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Betrayal? That's a strong accusation, Donald, he said smoothly. Surely you don't mean anyone here. Donald's gaze locked onto Victor's, unflinching. Victor, he said, his tone sharp, You're right. It is a strong accusation, and it's one I can back up. With a nod to his assistant, Mark, the large screen at the front of the room lit up. One by one, damning pieces of evidence appeared. Forged contracts, emails outlining plans to siphon funds, and suspicious bank transfers. The executives leaned forward, their faces a mix of disbelief and anger. Victor's smile faltered. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "These files could have come from anywhere. You're trying to pin this on me without proof." Donald didn't flinch. "Proof, you say?" He gestured to Mark, who pressed another button. The screen switched to a video recording. Victor, seated with one of his co-conspirators, detailing the entire plan. "We hit him where it hurts. Sophia," Victor's voice said on the recording. "Once he's too broken to fight back, we take everything." The air in the room grew heavy as the recording played. Victor's words sealing his fate. His face turned pale, and he shot to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Donald. "This is entrapment," he shouted. "You set me up." Donald rose slowly, his gaze icy. "No, Victor, you set yourself up. All I did was give you enough rope to hang yourself." At that moment, the doors burst open, and a team of police officers entered, led by the investigator Donald had been working with. "Victor Kane," the officer announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted coercion." Victor stumbled backward as the officers approached, his once confident demeanor replaced by panic. "You'll regret this, Donald," he shouted as the handcuffs clicked into place. "This isn't over." Donald crossed his arms, his voice steady. "Oh, it's over, Victor, and you'll have plenty of time to think about it." As Victor was led out, Donald turned to the room, his tone firm but resolute. "Let this serve as a reminder. We protect our own, and we will not tolerate betrayal. Ever." The room remained silent as Donald's words hung in the air, the weight of the moment sinking in. The conspiracy had been unraveled, and justice had been served. Donald and Sophia sat on the sunlit terrace of his estate, a quiet peace settling over them for the first time in weeks. The horrors they had endured still lingered in their minds, but they no longer defined them. Sophia sipped her tea, her strength slowly returning, while Donald held her hand, a silent promise in his touch. "We can't just move on like nothing happened," Sophia said softly, her eyes reflecting both pain and determination. Donald nodded. "You're right. What we went through, it's something no one should ever face alone. We can do more." From that moment, a new purpose was born. Together, they established a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of fraud, coercion, and abuse. Offering counseling, legal aid, and resources, they turned their pain into a beacon of hope for others. Sitting on the terrace, Sophia smiled, her gaze meeting Donald's. "We're stronger together," she said. Donald squeezed her hand. "And now we can help others find their strength too." Did this story touch your heart? Share your favorite moment in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love, hope, and resilience. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that inspire and heal.